The folks at Nenohi made a sister to their wildly popular Nenox series called Nagi, and I got a first look at one. I want to share what's new here, how the Nagi compares to the Nenox series, and potentially help you to make a decision if you've had your eye on one of these. What is up, folks? Justin Khanna here to cover this latest drop from Nenohi, and maybe that's a good place to start is to define some terms. What is the difference between Nenohi, Nenox, and now Nagi? Speaking personally, I know when I was spending 11, 12, 13-hour days in Michelin kitchens, having a Nenox was very aspirational because, mind you, this was back in 2011 when I would see certain chef de parties and certain sous chefs that I would look up to at the fine dining kitchens that I was in New York City using Nenox knives. In other words, high performers I would associate with Nenox knives, that brand, that name. And even if you go to Korin's website in the showroom where I would go in person to try to get some hands-on time with these knives, they list Nenox first and Nenohi in parentheses, and so I was always kind of confused. And so to clarify, Nenohi is the cutlery company. They oversee the product development of all of these knives, and they create individual series of knives underneath that brand umbrella. So Nenox is one, I have a bunch of these. The green-handled one is probably the one you've seen me talk about most on the channel. We also have the show line that I've covered here on the channel. This is more of an at-home focused line that Nenohi has launched in the past. And now we have this entirely different series, new branding, new box, new colors, new logo, and it's called Nagi. All right, when it comes to similarities between the Nagi and Nenox series, Nenohi confirmed with me that the steel in the Nagi series shares that same proprietary stainless steel you'll find in the Nenox S series. And that's what I was personally looking for first because I know they market that steel to prioritize sharpness, edge retention, corrosion resistance, and durability. And I get it, I wish I could say more here, that's just how Nenohi rolls with their steel. I will share more later on in the video on what the steel feels like to use. At the risk of making this more confusing, quick side tangent, it is worth saying that Nenohi actually does have a steel available for special order called the Nenox X series. X as in extreme is how they market it, which is supposedly an incredibly hard and delicate steel. I'm going to leave a link down low in the description if you want to read more about it yourself. But I wanted to bring up X series because I was looking at the S series name and I was like, S series is compared to what? And so then I stumbled upon the X series. X series is not available on the Nagi just yet. It might be in the future. Nenohi has not revealed that yet. The TLDR is if you've used a Nenox knife before, it's that same steel that carries over into the Nagi series. The other similarity is in what I'm calling design language. I am a red colorway guy myself, and that's what Nenohi kindly sent out to compare so we can have as close to apples as possible here. Design language features like pin placement, pin material, what they call the solid configuration construction, the kind of bone white and black spacers in between the tang and the stained bone, the spine thickness, the attention to detail on fit and finish, and even the top of the market prices on these, it's all shared between the Nagi and Nenox. And so I do agree with Nenohi in using the word sister here to describe the relationship between these two lines. Now, the best way I can sum up how I see the differences between Nagi and Nenox is handle and tiny variations. Let's start with the new handle. So to me, the elephant in the room is the removal of the metal end cap on the end of the handle that is so signifying of the Nenox line, leading to a design where whatever handle material you choose flows all the way through to the end. And because there's not a beveled piece of metal here on the end anymore, you'll find that the hand finishing includes all of these little micro bevels on that wider end section, which I really appreciated when I picked up this knife for the first time. Speaking of that new handle profile, you're gonna wanna get your microscopes out here with me because looking from the spine down on the profile of the handle, I do notice a different taper on the Nagi, which is a much more even taper compared to how the Nenox kind of has this bulbous shape, at least on my Tsujihiki as well as this Gyoto here. I wouldn't say it's noticeable enough to really affect ergonomics. I'm going to talk about why that's the case in a second, because the Nagi does still keep that swooped flare on the end following that Western handle design principle that carries across other knives too and other brands of that safety feature to make sure that the handle won't slip out as you're holding it, even if your hands end up getting wet. And here's the thing, Nenohi shared with me that the removal of that metal end cap does affect the proportions of how the weight is distributed on this knife, but when I put these two knives on the scale, and again, because I have these both in the same blade profile, there's just a 1 gram difference. So it's really cool to see this like knife making alchemy here, because there is a clear intention of having the Nagi line follow the same balance and in the hand feel as the Nenox series, even though the way that it's designed, and again, the proportions are different. Okay, as promised, the other set of points here falls into that tiny variations heading, and I will start with the ferrule, which does have a redesign with the Nagi series. You'll notice the ferrule on the Nagi being a much more condensed and less exaggerated part of the knife. What's so interesting about this to me is that yes, the design is different, but it's also the placement on the profile of the knife that's changed with the Nagi. I ended up doing an unboxing of this knife on Instagram, shout out if you were there live, and in that I thought, on my initial first look, that I thought they had changed the blade profile, but in having spent more time with this and comparing them two side by side, it's effectively the same shape of the blade profile profile, but Nenox's bolster is just more choked up on the blade itself, which leads it to feeling and looking a little bit different. And here's the thing, Nenohi did it on purpose. They wanted this redesign to help with sharpening, and so that when you're using this on a whetstone, it doesn't actually get in the way as much. And with the Gyuto, I don't think it comes into play that much, but as a proud owner of a Nenox petty knife, I sincerely hope that they produce a Nagi petty in the future, because I think that would be such a killer feature for such a short profile petty knife, and even on the Tsujihiki. Okay, last two on tiny variations. The first is the Magnolia Saya that has a tiny variation. Still magnolia wood, still has a Saya pin. The Saya on the Nagi has a different logo, as well as having just a little bit of a slightly different profile than the Nenox. Last tiny variation is the etching on the Nagi. So on one side of the knife, you've got the Nagi name, along with the Nenohi brand text and the word Japan, and then on the other side, you have the stamp and the logo for this new Nagi series, which actually, I should pause. I'm shocked that I haven't said anything about it yet. Nagi refers to a sacred tree in Japan. And so the box is green. Nenohi shares that Nagi is, quote, known for its symbolic meaning of unbreakable bonds and connecting good relationships, end quote. And in that paragraph that they shared with me, they said that they hope that the name brings good fortune, inspiration, meaningful connections to the user. But I honestly thought that they were commemorating their almost 30-year relationship with chefs, because, man, my Nenox has gotten me through some tough services. Okay, now let's talk about what the Nagi is like to use and who is it for. I have not posted a knife video on the channel in a while, apologies, so I do feel like I need to do a reminder for folks. If you can, I absolutely recommend holding knives in your own hands before you end up purchasing them. I know for myself, the first time I picked up a Nenox, it felt like an old friend, both in the 210mm Gyuto as well as the 230mm Tsujihiki, and even though it took a while for those to end up actually finding a way into my bag, I eventually ended up with both because once I held them, I could not stop thinking about them. The balance, the weight, the fit and finish details, the just kind of like practicality, use, and versatility across the prep projects that I was doing at the time, it just all matched. Not to mention the way that the steel performs, especially in a professional context. At least that was my story. I came for the ergonomics and the design language and the materials, and I stayed because of the way that the steel performed in my day-to-day work. When I would put an edge on it, it would last longer. Honing sessions were a lot more responsive. I felt like the edge just kind of like came back. Just that durability across a wide range of prep projects. I didn't have to baby the knife. And so with that user experience and context, I was personally nervous to see that they came out with this kind of hot series new line on the block, and they were touting similar balance marketing points, because upon initially seeing it, I was like, is it really going to be able to compete with Nenox? Is it going to feel the same? But I gotta say, the Nagi feels incredible. That slight movement of where the ferrule is makes total sense to me, because Nenox knives are notoriously just enough handle heavy. They tout that. And so balance-wise, if you take metal counterweight away in both two places, on the end cap as well as a little bit of metal from the bolster, and don't put a massively chonky handle in its place, something's got to give in order for the balance to actually be able to feel the same, and I just think they hit the nail right on the head with this. Other fit and finish details, like the small etchings in the bone handle ones in particular, they just don't typically carry over to like the Corian handle or the carbon fiber. Even though I don't typically cut with a wet hand or a gloved hand, I still think that it is kind of like a design, just stamp of signature for Nenohi to do on these. And even the little, like, the ferrule having the beveling so that when you hold this in something like a pinch grip or even with your finger on the top of the spine, where your thumb rests, if that indentation on the inside of your thumb knuckle rests here, it is just comfortable. It doesn't have, like, if you've ever used a wah handle that doesn't have this section beveled and it's just kind of like a 90-degree angle, that can become something that does blister over time, or just you decide to change your grip based on that design choice. And so from my limited time with this knife, this cuts and works and lasts and sharpens just like I would expect from my years using Nenox knives. And because the steel is the same, that's no surprise there, but if you've heard me gush about Nenox knives in the past, a lot of those similarities in performance are going to carry over to the Nagi series. A question you might have: if you've already got a Nenox, do you need to ditch it and go for a Nagi? I can't answer that for you, but if you've been in the market for a Nenohi knife in this style, I think this effectively now creates a choice you have to make on what handle style do you want. I can only imagine my guess would be that this would be rolling out in other blade profiles in the future. I'm very excited to see how this feels on petty and slicer blade profiles, mostly because of the ferrule redesign and how that works with sharpening and, again, ergonomics. But if anything, this just basically means that people who have way more Nenox knives than me can grow the size of their collections even further. Speaking of which, Nenohi did want me to add on that this is now an option if you do end up getting a custom knife from them, whether that's a specific blade profile that's not part of their larger production scales, or a handle material that's outside of, again, those larger scale productions. You can just say, hey, I want this Nagi style, and they have the capacity to do so now. I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the Nenohi team in Japan. Absolutely go pay the them a visit if you're in Tokyo. Tell them Justin sent you. I'm gonna leave a Google Maps link in the description for where to find their shop, because they not only have the lines that their globally authorized dealers have, but they also have more Japanese style knives too. And so I wanted to send a huge thanks to Nenohi for sending out these knives for this video. Be sure to get some color on that like button before you go. My name is Justin Khanna, and I hope you have a good one.